Okay. Roger, talk to me about how lockdown has affected you.
It's affected me in two ways, really. First way is in a way of disappointment, because this chapel, this famous chapel here in the Tower of London, is used a lot for all kinds of events that you know as well. We have our Sunday services. This time of year, we have almost a wedding every Saturday, and there are other great events. And of course, this year is really special for us because it's the 500th anniversary of the year, and we had a wonderful program. In fact, I have the booklet here, celebrating the 500 years of the chapel with the 15 events, and what would have been really, really wonderful. The pinnacle of the whole event would probably have been at some point for Her Majesty the Queen to have been here to help us celebrate this, her own private chapel. So there's a sort of measure. The lockdown has meant we're all rather sad and disappointed that a lot of work that's gone into things, and you can imagine for weddings as well, people are sad at having got themselves all psyched up and ready to get married. So there's that side of it.
No, and so it is quite extraordinary. Yes, I mean, the other, I guess the positive side as well, though, Roger, is that you're now connecting with audiences in a very different way.
Yeah, I was going to say to you, and the other side, so therefore what we've tried to do is to keep all the chapel family and others who have always been interested and support the chapel together, but in the way that churches are doing right across the country, which is through this amazing electronic means that which is all new to me as well, all this Zooming and other things that are going on. So there's a little group of us. There's my secretary, Debbie, my colleague, Cortland, and our Master of Music, Colin. And the four of us have decided when this all came about that we would find a way to keep in touch with everybody using this wonderful new electronic age. And what we've devised over the last nine or so weeks is a program which starts on a Monday with a 5-minute thought for the day, coupled with some wonderful music that Cortland, the Director of Music, Master of Music, feeds into that as well. So every Monday goes out to all these various people that. On Wednesday, we've tried to do something quite different. We've tried to produce a newsletter which will be both fun and informative. And so the fun bits are that we've tried to do, we've done jigsaws all related to the Tower of London, to word searches, through to something which has become really popular. And it's been just a small innovation we thought wouldn't go very far at all, but actually in the emails that I get and all the responses I get, I've asked various members of the chapel family to tell us, just like you're doing with me today, a little bit about how they're coping and what the lockdown has meant to them. So we've had members of the choir, we've had all sorts of members of the congregation, and this last week, we asked Pete McGowan, who is the Chief Yeoman Warder of the Tower of London and the former chapel clerk of the chapel, to tell us how he's been coping during lockdown. And the reason I'm saying to you that he's been really special is because his wife was desperately, seriously ill with coronavirus, and was in hospital and reached the point where, you know, we really wondered whether, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, whether she'd actually survive. And there came a point where, you know, prayers were being said by all of us who know Pete and know Debbie, his wife. But the good news is, thankfully, she's one of the good news stories. She recovered, and after more weeks in hospital, she was eventually returned home. So these videos, little YouTubes that we do every week from members of the congregation, have been really appreciated. Then by Friday, all week we've been working on it. We tried to put together a service, and we decided not to do live streaming, given that I have to do everything on this mobile phone. We decided live streaming was beyond this, Vicar. So we would produce a service, and we've done that. And for the last 9 weeks, we work all the way through the week, and we provide music and reading and prayers and a thought for the day. And we're very lucky, as you know, because David Suchet, Mr. Poirot, is a member of our congregation, and he does the readings every week. And Cortland and myself box and cox the thought for the day, and Colin, of course, produces really amazing music, which we stitch together and then send out on a Saturday, and people hopefully, except for my mother, who always seems to listen to it on a Saturday and not on a Sunday. I hope you're listening, Mother. Keep telling you off.
Glorious. And what's happened as well, Roger, is that you've now gone from a fantastic, beautifully formed congregation, it's the most beautiful, stunning place to visit, and also to have that wonderful experience. You've now got a global audience, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, what's extraordinary is that, you know, 150 people who were on our chapel mailing list has just literally exploded into, I don't know what the figures are at the minute, but people are telling me that it's, you know, not far off 1,000, and that in the last 3 weeks or so, we've had over 3,500 hits on the whole site. So that's amazing. But what does happen is that, and we're delighted with this, that family and friends, people, take your example, for example, Andrew, you could share it with your family, share it with your friends, and we've encouraged people to do this. And now we have links all over the world. I mean, literally all over the world, from America to Australia. Yeah, I mean, all sorts of people, and all sorts of people. Not, you know, people who are not necessarily people who would ever come to church, never be seen or wanting to come to church, are very happy to plug in to something electronic like this and to listen to a service. We also produce the service in 2 forms. We produce it deliberately in section by section by section, so that during the ongoing week, people can return to things. I mean, rather than produce it as a one-off, which we do at the end of it, so people can listen to the whole thing as a one if they want, they can actually think to themselves, oh, I'd really like to go back and hear what Roger said. Did he really say that? Did he really say that? You know, I just want to check it out. And actually, that's been one of the responses of quite a number of people, not just the church-going people, but other people who've said, actually, the music and the prayers and other things, we've actually returned to during the week. And that's been great.
Well, no, and absolutely stunning. And the other thing about having it is a global audience. Literally, you can reach everybody, and you can feel as though it's a one-to-one conversation, which is makes it a very different, special experience. But are you finding then you're competing with other people at other churches around the world?
Well, we would never be deliberately doing that, I can assure you. But of course, we're pleased that we've got some good numbers. No, I mean, all the churches, every church of every denomination, and let me say all faiths. I watched a thing on the news last night about a funeral taking place for a Muslim, and you know, and that was the whole thing was having to be done by live streaming. So all of us are having to find new ways to both communicate, keep in touch with, and assure people of our thoughts and prayers during these different times. So it's not just a Church of England thing, as you know, it's altogether, Andrew. You know, it's something that all the churches, and those of us like ourselves, for whom the electronic world, I mean, one of the lovely things that people like about the Tower of London, about this chapel, in a way, you know, we are still one of the few bastions of the 1662 prayer book. We still read the Authorised Bible because that's what the Queen likes. We still sing lots of wonderful music from Byrd and Tallis and Tompkins. And that sort of ambience of the chapel also is something about the chapel. You know, we're fairly old-fashioned, and technology is something we're growing now into. And of course, we're having to adapt. Every week, you know, we learn something new to try and enhance and encourage people to be online and join us and enjoy it.
And absolutely stunning on that sort of basis. Now, people in the media have always said there's been a number of issues, obviously, apart from people not being able to attend church. You mentioned about weddings and funerals and things like that. Talk to me a bit more about that and how people have been affected.
Well, so we don't do very many funerals here because people tend to work at the Tower of London and retire rather than die in office. I mean, it does happen. Sadly, it does happen, but very rarely. Weddings and baptisms, for example, are a very different kettle of fish. We do regular weddings here, and that's very much associated with the people who live and who fulfill the criteria for here. So every summer, from Easter right the way through to the end of the summer and into the autumn, we have, you know, probably two weddings at least every month. And there are, you know, I love weddings. Everybody will tell you, what does Roger enjoy? He's always enjoyed weddings. I love weddings. They're sort of one of the sort of bonuses of any priest's job, you know, to see everybody happy on these wonderful occasions is something that I've always relished and count as a great privilege. And, you know, for young people in particular who have spent a long time getting themselves ready for this, planning the wedding, planning the venue for the reception, you know, the photographer, the dress, the food, you know, the bridesmaids and everything, to then be told in March that churches are all closed and it's unlikely that they'll be opening for a long while. has really upset some of the people that I'm working with on weddings. And so what's happened is we've had to make the decision that we hope that churches might be open by the autumn, meaning September, in some limited way. And we can look at exploring whether they can postpone their wedding to then, or simply, as quite a number have done, they've just bitten the bullet and in the end said, look, we don't want to come to church in the autumn where social distancing dictates that it can be you, my mum and dad, 2 witnesses, no music, no nothing. We'd rather postpone our wedding and get married in 2021. So tough as it has been for some, and it's been really tough because people have lost deposits, lost money on things, haven't lost any deposit with us because we don't get a deposit. But you know what I'm getting at. You know, we're very happy to move things to next year and try and help people as much as we can. Same is true with baptisms. Same has been true with our 500 celebrations. We're all having to look at next year. Same is true with other services that annually take place here, as well as 1 or 2 individual ones, special ones that relate particularly to this particular building and to the buildings of the Tower of London. For example, the service of Lilies and Roses, which is, you know, unique to the Tower of London and commemorates the death of Henry VI in 1471. You know, and this wonderful old tradition here, sadly, you know, just disappeared this year.
And very sad. But as you say, there are many special things about the church and also the chapel. And as you know, because you very kindly did it for us, you christened our son, Aubrey.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the church and the chapel.
Okay, well, in the Tower of London, we have 2 chapels. The first one that was built in the White Tower on the instructions of William the Conqueror. And Bishop Richard, who is involved with your family, always calls it the Conqueror's Chapel. It's the oldest Norman chapel or church in the whole of the United Kingdom. Built, started in 1066 and completed in 1078. And it was the chapel royal for the royal family for over 600 years. There was also a little chapel built within the precincts of the Tower of London to serve those non-royals, because in fact only people would have worshipped in the White Tower would have been the royal family and their immediate friends and family. So there had to be a chapel in the Tower of London for the soldiers, the cooks, the foresters, the bottle washers, all the people who lived and served the White Tower. And so a little chapel was built and then became surrounded by the walls in the Tower of London. So it found itself in the precincts of the Tower of London. That chapel was built twice, once by Henry II and second by Edward I, and continued until 1481 when there was a fire which destroyed part of it. And then in the early reign of Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, I always tell this story with a bit of a tongue in my, you know, we do good for telling stories in the Tower of London. It always makes for a bit of a, you know, is that true? You know, so I always tell people that Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, they were up in the Tower of London, you know, and they were there in the White Tower, and Catherine of Aragon, who was very devout Catholic and gave alms to the poor, was walking around the Tower of London inside, saw the state of that last chapel, went upstairs for burger and chips with Henry, and said, listen here, you know, we're not doing well here. Those poor people, they need a new chapel. So in 1519, King Henry ordered that a new chapel should be built right next to the one that was damaged. At that time, he hadn't robbed the monasteries and Cromwell hadn't done his bit and all that sort of thing. So basically, he said, you'll have to use the stone from the original chapel to build this new one. So this new one, exactly as we see it today, was built in 1520, hence the celebrations this year of 500 years of the chapel. From being very much an ordinary little chapel to serve the needs of the community in here, over the next 100 years, it began to take on a whole new different role, because during Henry VIII's reign, as we know, he was quite good at chopping the heads off of various people, including 2 of his wives who are buried here as well within the chapel. And so people went to Tower Hill, they were executed, their bodies were brought back here, buried without the rites of the church within the chapel, and their heads taken to be boiled and tarred in the Tower of London before stuck on Tower Bridge, where they would then, after 28 days, be thrown into the River Thames. And over the 100 years, this chapel began to fill up with, you know, the great and the good, as well as those ordinary people who died around the Tower of London. And by the time Queen Victoria came along to look at the chapel in the mid-19th century, there were 1,800 bodies just below the floor level here, and 15 members of the royal family buried in the East End here, in what we call the Royal Pavement area, including 3 Queens of England, Queen Anne Boleyn, that's Sir Henry VIII's second wife, and then Catherine Howard, King Henry VIII's 5th wife, and then just in the front here, we have Lady Jane Grey, one of the saddest stories of the Tower of London. And amongst those and around them are other members of the royal family. So the chapel went from being a very nonplussed, really, if you like, very small, very plain little chapel, to something far more significant. And that's very much how it is remembered today. And it's one of the reasons why it's one of the major tourist attractions within the tower, because in principle, people are constantly coming here to see the graves of particularly Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard and Lady Jane Grey. We also have 2 saints of the church buried here. We have St. Thomas More, St. John Fisher, and among the royals, of course, we have Blessed Margaret Pole, the very last of the Plantagenets, who was executed here at the Tower of London as well.
So a phenomenal history. And you mentioned Thomas More. We've now got another Sir Thomas, who's done an everyday hero. And this is one of the great things about the terrible situation with the pandemic. We've talked about tragedies and people who've lost people very closely. Yeah. But also what this has done is shifted the focus for a lot of people as well, hasn't it? Because now there are these everyday heroes. We start to appreciate the things that we maybe took for granted beforehand. Things like the NHS and the essential workers and so on. And then you get their everyday heroes, people like Tom Moore. At that stage, he was Captain Tom, who then walked up and down his garden, wanted to raise £1,000, and ended up making 33 million, over 33
amazing.
Million, because the
Absolutely
nation got behind him.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think in all times of crisis, and you know that I come from a military background, and I've seen all over the world where I've been on operations and things, how it's quite extraordinary. I've always said one of the things that happens in times of crisis is often the people that you expect to rise to the occasion mostly do, but there's some who don't. And the ones who you don't expect to rise to the occasion for all kinds of reasons, out of them come the most extraordinary moments of kindness and gallantry and a sense of wanting to give something back. And I think that's something that's been a pattern of history over thousands of years. That's always so. The Sir Thomas More, do emerge out of this, as well as I heard a story the other day of somebody who was quietly in their street delivering meals regularly to an elderly person down the road, and this elderly person hadn't got a clue how every morning there was a rap on the door, and this other person didn't want to be identified, but every day for weeks on end had brought one meal to this elderly person. Now, they're never going to be knighted or whatever, but there are countless examples, I think, of this kind of kindness going on.
And I do think it has brought out the best in a lot of people, the sense of community. Sure, right. I think we're realising now what we miss, what we took for granted BC, before Corona, as we call it, what we took for granted, even simple things like hugs or just talking to people or seeing face to face. And what I very much hope once we get past this is that we'll remember the things that we really cherish and basically make the community a much better place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, at another level, I think that one of the things that people are beginning to realise, it never happens in the first couple of days, but it takes perhaps weeks and months, is the whole business of how you adjust to the qualities of silence and peace, and not having to fill every single moment with a couple of earphones in your ear, constantly playing out music and other kinds of things. And one of the things over and above the sort of things, which I'm sure you're absolutely right, I hope to goodness loads of wonderful things come out of this, is something just about the quality of life for everybody, that they'll, being in your home and trying to find time just to sit with the people that you love and care about, recognize you don't have to fill every moment of that, but you can have real quality in silence, in peace, and that kind of thing, as well as also trying to find time to do things together. I mean, I'm all in my school chaplaincy. I used to get slightly anxious about the number of children who would, as soon as there was a break, they would go to their mobile phone rather than do things together, as you and I might have done in our playground time in years gone by. And that one of the things you're hoping with, I hope will come out of this, is that people look at the quality of time and how they actually just use it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I always say that the more means of communication there are, the less we're able to communicate. And when you, yes. when you go to restaurants, or when you used to be able to go to restaurants, the people, rather than sitting and talking in the same way as we are, all engrossed in their phones and checking social media and things like that.
The other thing I've picked up actually from our chapel community as well is the difference between those people who are by themselves alone and those who are lucky and fortunate to be living with a partner, whether it's their wife or just living in a shared flat with other people. I'm conscious in my congregation here, I have quite a number of people here who are by themselves, and I've tried regularly to ring them and just say hi and how you're doing. And they're all doing fairly well. But one theme that comes out quite regularly, without them all knowing it, without talking to each other, is that they say, you know, we miss at the evening just having a conversation with somebody else. And what I'm trying to say also is that I think as a nation and as a community, we ought to try and remember a bit more about what loneliness is all about and how some people find that actually quite a struggle being themselves. You think of the widow as well as the young, you know, worker in the city who's left home, been to university, something, got a great job in the city, was actually living by themselves. But, you know, loneliness is a hard thing to deal with, I think.
Well, no, absolutely. Loneliness and isolation. One of the great things, I've been speaking to everybody from all walks of life on this series, as I say, from Australia to Zambia, to Belgium, looking at the different approaches that they have to this sort of thing. One common theme, as you say, is isolation. For those who don't have communication, I think we should be conscious of that and respect, and picking up the phone to people and saying, have a short conversation, saying to people who are very close to you, I love you, because you may not do that sort of, I may not say that, you might put it off till tomorrow. All those sort of things. I hope that will be the wake-up call.
I had a funny story. One of the members of my congregation told me the other day when I rang her. I said, well, how are you getting on? Fine. She said, do you know what I've been doing? She said, I've been going through my address book, and every single day I started at A and I've been ringing everybody in my address book, one after another, working my way all the way through. And she said, this is by way of what did she describe it as, a mid-year Christmas card. She said, you know, instead of the once-a-year Christmas card, I'm making an effort to go right the way through my address book. And I thought, well, that's really rather good. I might think about that, you know, start at the beginning of mine.
Yeah,
that isn't indicative of how long the pandemic's going to go on for.
Well, I suppose that, but A for Andrew Eborn. I'll expect that phone call, Roger. So that's good. The other thing which I've been doing is talking to people about how they got to where they are now, and looking back. And you've got a fascinating life. You were born in Shropshire. How much of those early days do you remember?
Oh, quite a lot, really. I came from Market Drayton in Shropshire, and my parents, I have twin sisters younger than me, 3 or 4 years younger than me, and my parents were just very much of their age. We were sent to Sunday school. When we'd finished in Sunday school, or grown out of it, or at least I became a choir boy. And there was a vicar, a wonderful old-fashioned Church of England vicar called Grenville Morgan, sadly died a long time ago. And I'm sure that he played, in his own quiet way, quite an influence on my life in those early years. It's a very busy church, you know, there was Sunday schools, youth clubs, all kinds of things going on, which left a deep impression for me of what the church could be. And although, of course, you move on and I did other things, or this, that, and the other, I can't deny for a single moment that I think the seeds were sown by, I often say Christianity is caught and not taught. And I think I caught something of what Christianity is all about in those very early years by an extremely caring, good, hard-working, charismatic vicar.
Okay. And you attended school in Liverpool, and you famously had a great...
Why I support the greatest team in the land, who sadly only need 2 games to lift the championship up. And all the
know.
beefeaters here in the Tower of London all know I'm a staunch Liverpool man. Sorry.
But it must be extraordinary, because you go along, or you would have gone along to matches and things like that. And how are you feeling about missing all of those?
Oh, I'm very sad. I mean, yeah, I didn't quite hear you correctly, but I mean, I'm glad that football's being restarted. I think it's probably a good thing for the nation. You know, we're a sporting nation. We love our football, cricket, tennis, you know, darts, you name it, snooker, all sorts of things. We've always loved that as a British nation. I am sad, but I think it's absolutely right that social distancing at this stage should dictate that they should be behind closed doors. I think that's a great sadness, but we have got televisions, radios and other things where we can still continue to follow it. So, and I hope and pray, just like every other part of our cultural life, that by the end of the year, beginning of next year, hopefully we'll be back pretty much on track and looking at the way we did things before. And Liverpool will be thrusting ahead for their second go at the Premier League.
Well, we love it. I'm sure. I was talking to a number of football people, from the executives to the ardent fans, some of whom would disagree with some of your statements there. But it should be good. You went to Priesthood. You went to Lincoln to train for that. Talk to me about the calling. I mean, as you say, it's that was like. What was the process? You going to school in Liverpool? Was there one particular moment when you said, "Right, this is what I want to do"?
No. They often say whoops. Sorry, they often say. Are you still there? Sorry about that.
I thought this is a moment from God. I thought this is wonderful. This is
telling me we've only got about 20% left on this phone. So.
Oh well, we could take a break. We could do that. It sounds good. Okay.
No. They often say in vocations, in terms of callings, to all kinds of things, whether it's to the church or to nursing or to being a teacher or to being a journalist. You either have this sort of Damascus Road experience where you suddenly reach a point in your life and something happens, and it can be any manner of things, and you suddenly realize you've got to go in a certain direction. And then there are a number of people who travel what we call the Emmaus Road, which is a gradual road where the truth imparts itself over a gradual process of circumstances, events, and people. And I think I'm one of those people who, as I say, I was lucky enough to be encouraged into the church, to go to church as a child, and I've never really felt that God's left my side. The process of moving from, being a lay Christian to becoming a priest, for me, was about testing it out and seeing whether, if the door remained open, I would continue going in that direction. And if the door slammed flat in my face, I would be saying to myself, this is the moment at which I perhaps ought to rethink this and go in another direction. So I tested it out, as people do, and the door continued to stay open. And I then went on to Lincoln. I went to God's own county of Shropshire to do a 3-year curacy. And then, because I was still relatively young by today's standards, in my late 20s, I thought about the armed forces and joined the army. I thought I would enjoy that way of life, working with young people, lots of traveling. It would be good for my family. I was married by then with children, and it would be good fun. And actually that proved to be the case.
And you went to quite a few countries when you were in the forces. Talk about some of those.
Yes, I'm a very classical chaplain of that early 80s and 90s period. There were operational tours in Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Kosovo, East Timor, and lots of other places. So I spent the first 12 or more years of my life simply as a regimental operational chaplain, going with soldiers all over the world, ministering to them and their families when we were back, in garrison towns. And then as time went on, as inevitably in any, I use the word career lightly, because only to describe the route of the armed forces, like any other profession, I sort of found myself moving in different directions. And I finished up in Edinburgh before I had a telephone call inviting me to leave the army and come down here to the Tower of London and do a proper job.
So talk to me about that telephone call. I mean, it is an extraordinary journey. People always wonder how this comes about, and
yes.
Professions.
Yes, I mean, these sort of. I was quite literally working on a Monday morning in Edinburgh, 3 or so years into my appointment. It was a very busy job, an extremely busy job, looking after chaplains all over Scotland and the north of England, as well as sending people on operational tours to Iraq and other places. When my secretary walked in and said, "There's a phone call from you. I think it's quite important, and you ought to answer it now." And Yeah, and so I answered this phone call. It was the Constable of the Tower of London at that particular time on behalf of the palace, ringing to say your name's been given to us as a possible candidate to come and be one of the chaplains to the Queen and to live at the Tower of London. I know that you've still got some years to do in the armed forces. I had actually had 6 years to do. And when you're next down in London, will you come and see us? That's a polite way of saying we want to interview you and you better get yourself down here.
Right.
So that's what I did. But in fact, as people will tell you and know, I sat then on the job for quite a long while because I really enjoyed being an army chaplain and ministering among chaplains and soldiers and their families. And eventually I got another phone call from Richard Charters, your friend, the bishop, telling me to make my mind up. The time has come. And I always blame Barbara for this. She always said, you know, two things about this. One, you'll love all that dressing up. And secondly, you'll have to find something else for you to do where you keep your feet on the ground. And to be serious, I think the point was that I'm one of these people. It's been, you know, my journey has been one where I've never really applied for a job anywhere in my working life. I've gone where I've been told to go. That's what happens in the armed forces. And I felt if the bishop and the, you know, the Queen or whatever it is calling me to this particular job, who am I to say, you know, that I should carry on doing what I do? So, you know, it was quite a risk at the time. I mean, it was quite a, you know, after 20 plus years, I knew this was going to be an enormous sea change, but I thought if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And so that's what happened 13 years ago. And so time rolls on.
And quite extraordinary. And do you know how your name would have come on Her Majesty's radar? And do you know, were you told?
I think it's something to do with her. I don't think she knew Roger Hall very well.
I was going to say, it was one afternoon over tea. She was the crumpets. And by the way, do you fancy a job?
Well, exactly. No, I think it was much more to do with the constable, the then constable at Constable of the Tower, a most absolutely wonderful man called Roger Wheeler, who I'd actually worked with in Northern Ireland. He was the general there, and I was very involved with some very, very unpleasant and sad businesses out in Northern Ireland, burying soldiers who died here, and also involved with the Chinook helicopter disaster when over 26 intelligence officers were killed. And so I got to know the general very well. And I think we'd sort of, not that you become friends at that level with generals, but he'd always sort of kept in touch as a result of all the time we'd had to spend together burying soldiers and visiting families. And I think he knew that I had become a fairly senior army chaplain as Assistant Chaplain General. And I think he just wanted to test the waters out and thought I might be a possible candidate to come here. And so that's how it started, with an exploratory conversation. I want you down here at the Tower of London, Roger. time to resign. Yes, sir.
Then? I mean, if you were going to do a job description, apart from the fantastic things you do at the Tower, what would your job description be?
For here?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my first role is to pray for the Queen. I mean, I'm chaplain to one of the 6 deputy priests in Ordinary, so I'm a member of the royal household. My first job at all services, public and private, is to pray for Her Majesty the Queen and all the members of the royal family, in exactly the same role, it's extraordinary really, as chaplains have done for thousands of years for monarchs right down the centuries. They've always had those who pray. And the Book of Common Prayer, you know, has within it the prayers for the Queen and the royal family, and that's my first and foremost role. Then to look after the 2 chapels on her behalf, because these are still private chapels that belong to her. And then thirdly, to care for the community that live within the Tower precincts of the Tower of London, as well as look, with, you know, that obviously spills over into tourists and many other people that come to visit the Tower of London as well.
So it works on that sort of basis, which is phenomenal. And you very kindly invited us to see you being canonised as well. Talk to us a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, in the when I told you the Chapel Royal here was here for over 600 years, and originally at the time at the end of the Chapel Royal, when it moved from here to St James's Palace, and when it was basically with the Reformation, the 6 canonries that were here at the Tower of London were all disbanded and got rid of because they were no longer needed. And thanks to Bishop Richard Charters, he after a certain amount of time here, he said, I think it'd be quite rather fun to try and reinstate one of these canonries, and we'll create a seat at St James's Palace. And so he went to see the Queen, and the Queen said, well, this is rather fun. She said, I'm usually, you know, disposing of things rather than creating things. So she, I'm very flattered and very honoured that she agreed to this. And so I became effectively the first canon of the Chapel Royal since the Reformation, which was a great honour, and have a seat official seat, if you like, in St James's Palace at the Chapel Royal there.
And it was a glorious service. You very kindly invited a number of us to come and witness you being canonized. And as I say, some of the favourite moments. I think it's people get all sorts of comfort, but it's when it's a magical surroundings and all that sort of steeped in history.
What amused me, the most amusing part of that, you might remember, was Bishop Richard read out this great scroll that had been created for with all the rights and privileges of the chapel, canon of the Chapel Royal, and then sort of under his breath, sort of halfway through, said, "Yeah, don't hold your breath on any of these, Roger."
It was a glorious moment, which is
was very funny, really.
Now, I know, Roger, a lot of people take a lot of comfort from these sort of videos, and they also have a lot of questions. And there's one which a lot of people have asked me, and I thought, if I can ask you, they talk about the power of prayer. Okay, the power of prayer, and they say that if God is listening to us, where's it gone wrong? What would you say to them?
Well, I am a really firm believer, and this comes out of my army experience and out of the death and destruction, the absolutely appalling murder of soldiers, and for example in Bosnia, seeing and being party to seeing women and children, the bodies of people who've been murdered totally senselessly, to always have believed that God shares with us and is in that pain, not creating and absolving himself from that pain. I've always believed theologically that, he is part of it. What pains us pains him. It doesn't answer the question of why he doesn't strike down and do something about it, but as to the question about how he is part of that. So when I held the hand of a dying soldier, it was nothing about me at all. It was about God holding the hand and sharing the pain and the agony and the tears of that person who died at that time. It's traveling with, being a part of, it's part of being incarnationally, if you like, part of that whole process of sharing that with us. And now, that doesn't answer the question for a lot of people. A lot of people still feel that God should intervene. Why does he let these, why does he let children die? Why does he let, terrible things happen? That's a different question. But I think the power of prayer is the power, to me, of helping people feel connected to a God who is sharing with them in the pain and suffering that they're sharing.
And what would you say to people who do ask that slightly different question then about why doesn't God intervene?
Ask somebody who knows how to answer it better than I do. No, I mean, that's a frivolous answer. I mean, I'm no theologian. I mean, I think the whole business of God is that he's not a whole history of what faith and religion is all about. He's not been a God who's intervened. He's allowed us, the very human beings, to be the people we are, and out of that to represent what it is about him as well. And the moment, oops, there we go again. Have you got me? The moment he intervenes, is the moment he becomes a dictator. And it's not about that. It's not about dictating. It's about loving people. And, I wouldn't want a God who was, dictating the terms to me and you and being almost unpredictable in where he would do that. It's up to us to find the God in you and me and everybody else to enable the better things to happen. So many of the things in life that have happened shouldn't necessarily have happened in the first place anywhere if people had just behaved in a civilized and loving way towards one another.
Right. So it's a tricky question, as you say.
It's terribly difficult.
Because, and I can understand why people ask it, because they will simply say, look, if the prayers are not answered, I mean, firstly, how does he pick which prayer to answer, or he or she? How is it picked? And secondly, obviously everybody's praying for this to finish. Why is it not finishing?
Yeah. Well, I think, we pray for the scientists, we pray for the medical researchers, we pray for the doctors and the nurses, we pray for all those that are, involved with it, and hope that out of all this, you said over and over again, that sometimes out of pain and suffering, goodness and light and hope and love will be reflected in a different way in many, many ways. And I think that's part of what the answer has to be, I think, to these times of pain and suffering. It makes it very difficult for the families and people of the nearly 40,000 people who've had to go through that particular process, as part of the suffering, I think.
I think that's absolutely right. But as they say, in amongst all the tragedy, there is a shining light. There a lot of good has come. I do think there's nothing which unites people more than a common enemy.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with that entirely. Yeah.
So in your illustrious career, a couple of final questions, your illustrious career, what has been your biggest regret and what has been your proudest moment?
Anybody will tell you, all my close friends, I'm lucky, I've got a group of friends that I've traveled with through my life and know me quite well. And I really count my blessings for that. My wife, who I met when I was at school, we've been together since we were 16, long travel together. I think I would say to you maybe on tiny things, but I'm not somebody who's lived with lots of regrets. I've counted my blessings and thought to myself, this is amazing. That's okay. As far as, the big moments are, funny enough, the big moments are often little moments, but big moments for me. At a personal level, you can never get over having children and grandchildren and what that means to you. At a professional level, my mum, who's still alive and is 92, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, when Barbara and I went for tea with the Queen, and I sat there, my mum said to me, whoever would have thought that the boy who, did a paper round in Liverpool and went to the secondary modern school in Liverpool would have ended up going to have tea with the Queen. He said, and Mum said to me, if my mum was here now, she'd drop down dead with amazement. And I'm just saying to you, that's not, it's not a glitzy moment in St. Paul's Cathedral, not a glitzy moment I've had lots of those moments and lots of privileges with my army life, and real privileges. But it's those little moments that are unique, which are unique to me, which I just still look at that and think, crikey, there we are, sat with the corpus, having tea with the Queen. Well, she poured me a cup of tea.
Did she? What sort of tea was it? What tea did you have?
It was very nice tea. She was just lovely. She was just absolutely lovely.
Did you have a cake with everything? Was there a cake you had? Was there a
Yes, it was tea. Went for afternoon tea at Windsor. It was just, and she was both regal, serene, everything that I've come to know about her as Her Majesty the Queen, but also she's just a very wonderful human being as well, with an enormous amount of graciousness and love and charity, and a wonderful way to connect with. She's got the most wonderful smile. She's got the most disarming smile you could ever imagine. When she smiles at you, even the most ardent royalists I know have crumbled at her feet. Non-royalists, Republicans, have crumbled at her feet, because she is quite disarming. She's quite wonderful, and that's very special. And she, Andrew, is going to be a real legacy of our history. I mean, there's no monarch we lived longer than her. And, she's seen it all from, right to where we are. My great-great-great-grandchildren will still be talking about her in the way that we remember Queen Victoria and others. And it's just amazing to have touched on a little bit of that.
Phenomenal. And your mother and Her Majesty, and actually my mother's 90 as well. It's an extraordinary generation. But they're also very good at making sure we stay grounded, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And finally,
my mum said to me when we were going, she just said to me, "You have polished your shoes, haven't you?"
Oh, wonderful stuff. It's really, really good. And finally, I was going to ask you, how would you, Roger Hall, like to be remembered?
Oh gosh. I'd like to be remembered as somebody who's been faithful to God, faithful to my family, and faithful to those things that I believed in, including Liverpool Football Club.
Roger, thank you so much. It's lovely to see you. I look forward to seeing you online. Maybe you'll join us again.
I will. Delighted. Thank you, Andrew, very much indeed. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Roger. Take care.
Bye-bye.
So there we have it, the Reverend Canon Roger Hall, very good friend, Liverpool supporter, you probably didn't notice that, but actually a fantastic man as well. Do join me next time for Andrew Eborn's Lives on Lockdown. If you'd like to take part in the show in any way, or drop me a note, or have any comments, put them in the comments below, or write to me at lol, that's LOL, at octopustv.com. But for now, be safe, look after yourselves, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.